All right, good evening, everyone. It is October 7th, 2024. This meeting of the Barnstable Infrastructure and Energy Committee is being recorded and will be posted for future viewing on the Town of Barnstable website. Under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, anyone else desiring to make such a recording or transmission must notify the chair. And with that, over to you, Barry.
Okay. Well, for this meeting, we have Lisa Sullivan, who's the regional coordinator for DOER. She's agreed to give a presentation and to answer questions. I think after we'll do the minutes first, then we'll go to Lisa and do other matters related to green communities, and then we'll go over to Chris. We're going to go a little bit out of order so that Chris can update us on climate science and climate events. I know he was in Climate Week last week in New York, and then we can go to John for food waste. Hi, Kristen. So Kristen has just joined us. Kristen, we're just starting the meeting. So let's I think people have looked at the minutes, hopefully, and I looked at it. They look fine to me. Does anyone have any questions regarding the minutes of the last meeting? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
A move.
Okay, second. Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes? Okay, the minutes are approved. And with that, we can go over to Lisa Sullivan. Lisa, you we'll hand it over to you, and you have a presentation. And I will say that I've had several conversations with Lisa. She's been very helpful and has provided important information to us about the Green Communities Program. Thanks, Lisa.
Great. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I started working with Barnstable. I became the Green Communities Regional Coordinator about 5 years ago, and I started working with Barnstable early on. We talked about whether or not Barnstable would like to be a green community. And so I did do a couple presentations. So I'm just going to reiterate a little bit for the new members. I think most of you actually are new. I don't remember actually seeing, I don't see any familiar names. So I'll go through fairly quickly because I know you have a full agenda and we can have questions at the end. So we're the Green Communities Division is the hub for all Massachusetts cities and towns, not just designated green communities. As I was mentioning before, Barnstable isn't a green community, but DOER has helped you with a recent infrastructure grant. And if we hear of federal funding that's available, we reach out to the town and we try to help them put an application together as need be. The town is also can apply for municipal energy technical assistance, which they've done in the past, and other things outside of the Green Communities Program. So this is just some of the things we offer: Green Communities Designation and Grant Program, Municipal Energy Technical Assistance, which is kind of clean energy alternative. They're not large grants. We used to do the LED Streetlight Grant Program. We work with the EVIP Electric Vehicle Incentive Program and the Clean Cities programs. We partnership with Mass Development on PACE. We offer a Mass Energy Insight energy tracking and analysis tool that a lot of communities and districts like water districts and school districts use. And we're coming out with the Climate Leader Community Program as well. There are 295 green communities. The entire Cape actually and the islands, except for Barnstable, are green communities. Sandwich will be designated this year. We award $20 million per year in grants to qualifying communities. This is kind of our social math page. It's not really updated to include our most recent grants or the grants that have been closed, but this just gives you an idea. It's a very active program. We're constantly awarding grants. And we're always closing out grants, and we add it up and incorporate what the dollars saved are and the energy saved, and we kind of put it into like how single family homes or cars in terms of emissions reductions and energy saved. This is just what some of your neighbors have received to date for grants. I'm not going to go through this. I can share this presentation at the end, but you can see that, Wellfleet has received over $588,000 to date. Truro, $510,000 to date. And like I said, every community on the Cape and the islands is now designated. Sandwich will be designated before the end of the year. Barnstable's estimated designation grant amount. So that would be if you meet the 5 criteria and achieve Green Communities designation, your first grant would be $220,000 or roughly there, like within that range. It's based on a population and per capita income formula. So this is just telling you how it typically works. We usually, if the town is interested in pursuing green communities, we usually give a Green Communities 101 presentation similar to this. And then the town tries to meet the 5 criteria. We do offer technical assistance for towns that need help. Cape Light Compact typically offers the assistance on the Cape, and it's usually to help communities develop their baseline energy use in MEI and to audit the buildings to come up with potential projects. So the criteria: adopt as a right setting for renewable or alternative energy, R&D or manufacturing, adopt expedited permitting, create energy reduction plan to reduce energy use by 20% in 5 years, adopt a fuel efficient vehicle purchase policy, minimize life cycle costs in new construction and some major and large additions and renovations by adopting the stretch code. All of our guidance documents are available online. This is basically just how you could go about adopting criteria 1. As far as I know, you do have a as of right renewable or alternative energy generating facility bylaw. I think it's for solar PV. That's what David Anthony told me. It has not been confirmed in writing. I haven't seen the bylaw, nor have I seen something from your legal counsel, telling us how it's incorporated and what the rules are. But I think you do have one, according to David Anthony. Of course, that was back in 2020 that I received that information. Criteria 2 is expedited permitting, which just says that within 12 months, if someone presents an application, for example, for solar PV in that as of right area, the zone you allow it as of right, then you would process that application within 365 days. Typically, planning board rules and regs kind of require that. They don't let you sit on those applications. Criteria 3 is energy baseline, determining that, creating it in MEI, and establishing a plan to reduce your energy use by 20% over 5 years. You did start that back in 2020, 2021, but I don't know if you ever completed it. And by now we would have to update the baseline and go through and see what projects might have been done on your own. So we'd probably have to update that. Criteria 4, we have our own fuel efficient vehicle policy. I can tell you that Barnstable also has one. So we would want to go in and we would want to adopt ours and see where they overlap just to make it clean, but you'd probably want to adopt ours. And just to let you know, in our current fuel efficient vehicle policy, police cruisers are still exempt. But eventually they won't be. Eventually we'll require like police cruisers to meet our policy because there's more hybrids available. But they currently are not, and heavy duty vehicles are exempt because there still aren't a lot of options for vehicles over 8,500 pounds. This is just an example of what the current policy says. If you're buying a 2-wheel drive car, we would like to see it get 30 miles per gallon and so on. Like I said, I will send you this presentation so we don't have to go into deep detail, but all hybrids and electric vehicles meet our policy. These are not difficult combined miles per gallon to meet. You can tell if you go on to fueleconomy.gov if a vehicle meets the policy. And in terms of vehicle recycling, we want to get your inventory cleaner. So if you're replacing a vehicle and recycling it, for example, from one department to another, you want the one that you're updating to be more fuel efficient than the one you're transferring. You're replacing it, so when you do the transfer.
So Lisa, just
Yeah.
before we move on from that, so I understand that the town does have its policy, but I'm not sure whether it's compliant with DOER's policy. So which apparently you said was adopted earlier this year in February. Is that correct?
You have not, we updated our policy in February 2024. I don't know when your policy was last updated, and I don't even know if it was the same as ours. You could have had your own unique policy. So
Okay.
you would need to probably update your policy to reflect ours, because
Okay.
our policy, our guidance, we update it, and whatever you adopt, if you're adopting ours, it says you'll adopt all future renditions of it. And that's what we want you to do. So it's not a stagnant policy. It gets updated every couple of years.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yep, it does.
Okay.
Yep.
And then minimizing life cycle costs in new construction and large scale renovations and additions. Towns do this by adopting the stretch code. And when they adopt the stretch code, like we were just talking about the fuel efficient vehicle policy, they're adopting all future additions. Code changes every 3 years, basically. So base code gets brought up to date every 3 years, and the stretch code gets brought up to date to reflect. So it's the changes to the base code. So it's always a stretch beyond base code.
Can I ask a question about that, Lisa? This isn't something that I expect would come up, but say that we had a situation where for some reason the town didn't like a change to the stretch code that was made 3 or 6 or 9 years from now. Would the town be able at that point to opt out? We would lose I expect we would lose our green communities designation, but that's just sometimes people are uncomfortable by being locked into an unknown. I just wanted to clarify that there was an escape mechanism if something strange happened.
You can pull the cord and you can get out. You get out in the same way that you came in. So for Barnstable, that would be a town council vote.
Yeah.
So they would be, they would be no longer enforcing the stretch code, and they would vote to rescind the stretch code, and then you would lose your green community status.
Yeah. But
3 towns in Massachusetts have rescinded the stretch code. So full disclosure, they're not, I think Rochester, Clinton maybe, and Essex. Okay.
Thank you.
So there's currently 256 communities that are enforcing the stretch code. There's 45 communities that are enforcing the specialized opt-in code, which is a more stringent version even of the stretch code. And communities are doing that because it's going to be a requirement for climate leader communities. And they're usually, these communities that have adopted the specialized energy code, they are kind of the climate leaders. They're the ones who adopted stretch code first 10 to 12 years ago as well. And 50 towns are still enforcing the base energy code. So why test performance? So prescriptive codes don't guarantee good installation, air and water tightness, or that thermal insulation is effective. And small air gaps can reduce insulation and R values by 50% or more. So by having HERS raters provide third-party verification and doing blower door tests, we're making the envelope tighter. So that is a main requirement of stretch code, is the HERS rating process, and holding new buildings and large-scale additions and renovations and commercial projects that also apply to these HERS ratings, or these superior building performance paths, let's say. So what is a HERS rating? This is just showing it's like a scale. At the top is existing homes that might have been above on a HERS index scale of 100 to 150. A new home might be at 100, but with the HERS rating process, we're now averaging about a 51 as of 2021, which means that those homes are 49% more efficient than they were in 2006. So we're getting more efficient all the time because of great building practices. And HERS ratings are helping us get there because we're making envelopes tighter and there's less air leakage. What is the HERS process? I think an important thing to do is to tell you is that it doesn't take your building official out of the mix. He still issues occupancy permits and he still does his typical inspection. So he's still the primary person, but we do have this third-party verification. At the beginning of the process, they do modeling to help the homeowner or the construction team figure out how they're going to meet the HERS rating requirement for the project. And then there's some in-process inspections, including duct tightness test and an insulation inspection and a blower door test. And then at the end, they spit out a finalized energy model based verified performance. And it's the number, it's the HERS number, and they provide that to the building official. And the building official will look at it and make sure if it was required to get a 42 or a 45, that the project meets the requirement for the time that the permit was pulled. Okay, because we do it based on permit pull date, because that's what your building official is looking at. Because like I mentioned to you before, code changes. So you have to know what the permit pull date is to know what code you're under. Because right now, for example, you're a base code community, but maybe in January 2025, you'll be a stretch code community. So that's hopeful.
Yeah, so Lisa, just for clarification, the permit pull date is is that when the permit is applied for, or is that when the inspection is done?
It's the date that they're applied for. So when the
Okay.
permit is applied for, the building official would tell the general contractor what was required. Like you're required to get a HERS rating of 42 or 45. 42 if you go mixed fuel, 45 if you go all electric. And then they would provide a modeling score from the HERS rater that showed what they anticipate the score to be, and then they'd go through this process that's on the screen, and in the end they'd come out with a final HERS rating after construction is done and a blower door test is
completed. Okay, fine. That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Yep. This is just a HERS rating, a history of the HERS ratings in Massachusetts throughout the years.
Lisa,
and yeah,
sorry to interrupt again. I don't know if you can see, but Dr. Kristen Turkelson raised their hand.
Okay.
Lisa,
Hi, Chris.
Thanks. I'm just curious if what percentage of HERS tests don't meet the HERS ratings on average within a year?
There's very few that don't meet the HERS rating. A new construction, very few, because they model to meet the HERS rating. So occasionally we'll have something fall through the cracks, but I'd say we check and we enforce and check this annually to make sure. Towns do annual reports and we check on HERS ratings. And typically there is a reason, like we don't have the final HERS score. Or I have seen, for example, something like Energy Star appliance wasn't there when and they were counting on that point at the time of construction, but maybe the building official didn't hold up occupancy and they're just waiting for confirmation that Energy Star appliance was put in. So very few over the course of 200, like I said, there's 295 green communities, and I think there's 301 communities that are enforcing stretch code or greater, and we have very few issues.
Okay, so because we're planning to meet this rating, there's a very low failure rate of not meeting this rating.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Kristen, just on that point, I talked to the consultant for the Mass Home Builders Association that provided comments to DOER on the proposed changes to the stretch code regulations. And I think in the situation that Lisa said, if there was some issue with some Energy Star appliance that couldn't get in, the building inspector could allow the temporary occupancy subject to that, getting done. So.
Yeah, I'm just imagining it's more like those minor things rather than something major that went wrong in the process that really sets the homeowner back from being able to get into their house.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, the problem isn't new construction. I will tell you, and the additions and renovation piece threw a few people for a loop. It was over 1,000 square feet additions and renovations. And I'll get to that a little later in the presentation, but we recently had a public hearing on September 16th, and we're considering proposed changes to the stretch code. And that's a main piece that we're looking at, is making the large additions and renovations HERS rating less stringent so that it's easier to meet. Because as you can imagine, existing construction can go back 100 years or more, or it could be more recent, up to maybe someone's doing an addition on something that's 3 to 5 years. So there's a varies so much that we're really considering being less stringent on that particular area to make it easier for homeowners and builders. This was the stretch code update. We took it over in January 1, 2023 because of climate legislation. So DOER took responsibility for creating the stretch code. This is residential low rise was the first update that took place on January 1, 2023. HERS ratings were required to be 52 to 58 for new homes and multifamily, and it affected some large scale renovations and additions, which this was a first for this. This was not in the stretch code previously. Heat and recovery ventilation was required, and EV ready wiring required for new construction. And then July 1, 2023, we had the commercial and multifamily update kicked in. That included TEDI for office schools, multifamily, thermal bridging, air leakage testing, heat recovery ventilation, and also includes commercial large renovations and additions. And then July 1, 2024, there was yet a third phase that kicked in, and that was the residential HERS phase in, where the HERS ratings dropped to HERS 42 for mixed fuel and HERS 45 for all electric, which, by the way, are in line with the specialized opt-in code. So that's the even more advanced code. So this was just, we know it can be done. We were seeing HERS ratings in the low 50s back in 2020 and 21. And this is where we want to get with our climate legislation and what we need to do to meet our goals. So this is where code is going. Residential new construction. This is just providing some context. In 2020, 87% of new homes used a HERS code pathway with an average of HERS of 51. I see towns getting HERS ratings even when they're not required to get HERS ratings or meet stretch codes, because this is something that builders are doing now. As Barry and I have talked about, builders are nomadic. They just don't build in Barnstable or Mashpee or Falmouth. They build in areas. And so the whole Cape, aside from Barnstable, is stretch code and enforcing stretch code. So this is something we see, and often it's something that homeowners are looking for. Because they want to have heating and cooling bills that they can count on. So the primary change was to increase efficiency performance from HERS rating of 55, which we saw a couple of years ago, to the HERS 42 with gas heat or mixed fuels like oil, or HERS 45 with electric heat. And this is just telling you in the blue block what a HERS 42 or 45 might mean for builders. For electric homes, it would mean heat pump space and water heating and better air sealing. And if you were trying to do mixed fuels with natural gas, for example, you might need to triple glaze windows instead of double glazed windows, or improved wall and roof insulation and better air sealing to get to that 42. So increased incentives for builders and developers. Yes, it costs more money, but there are a lot of incentives. Mass Save gives significant incentives for HERS ratings of 15,000 for a HERS 45, 25,000 for a HERS 35 or passive house. You're building in redundancy, like with the heat pumps, it's replacing both central AC and furnace. So you don't have to have two systems. So that reduces costs as well. And all electric homes are generally cheaper to build. And then at the bottom, there's federal tax credits as well that kick in that also make this a good investment. So our research from 2021 showed that lower life cycle costs for all the building types, lower first costs for some building types. I think the lower first cost for some building types, a lot of them were commercial buildings. It was more expensive, but eventually we saw some lower life cycle costs. And Barry has said he wants to see more recent cost information, and we are working on that, both on residential models for, I think, 2,100 square foot and 4,000 square foot homes, as well as a sampling of renovations and large scale additions and commercial. So we will get that to you as soon as it's available. And this is just a slide.
Could I ask a question about the life cycle, about the life cycle costs?
Yep.
Over what time period is that life cycle calculated? When you say the life cycle cost, is that over the 100 years that the building's there? Is it 10 years?
I think it's over I think it's over the standard mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
like a 30-year mortgage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I think they use a standard because you could use anything. But we're kind of like the average homeowner. We usually try to break it down and tell people what the return on their investment would be and when they'd be kind of cash flow positive in terms of their electric bills. If they had to make an extra investment, when are they going to start to feel that return on investment? It might be different for commercial as well. You can see that I'm skirting over commercial. The commercial is a little more complicated than I like to get into. And what I have promised Barry is if you decide to take this to the next level and you want to do a workshop with your council, your town council form of government, we would do that. We would bring a code expert, the same consultant that does the training for building officials through the Mass Save portal. They do both Zoom. It's free to anyone who really wants to take it, but we'd bring a code expert to answer any of those technical questions on both commercial, residential, etc., so that the council could really feel comfortable.
That's good. And just at least just a question, your 2021 study team, that's the team that produced the results, the summary results that I think you published in 2022. Is that?
So our 2021 study, so you had asked me about recent costs, and I said to you, you're right, our costs do date back to when we did the original straw proposal in 2021 and 2022. We had a whole public hearing process to introduce these new code changes, and they need to be updated, and you are correct. So we have a consultant working on those now. And we're using ICF as the consultant who does that. So it's not the same people who do the training. PSD does the training. We like to have kind of separate them. So it's not, it's kind of unbiased, I guess.
Sure. No, ICF is a reputable consulting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Familiar with it. Yeah.
Lisa, I have a question. This is Jane.
Hi, Jane.
I really appreciate you going through this with us, and I am a huge fan of this, and I'll tell you what my bias is. I worked on a group at the National Institutes of Health in 2010. We formed, it's kind of an advocacy group, but it was hosted by NIH. It was called the Health and Buildings Roundtable, and we were actually health-related people from all sectors, clinicians, public health, some building designers and engineers, but we were actually challenging the U.S. Green Building Council because their initial rollout and point system made indoor air quality an elective point. So you could build a very tight building that actually wasn't healthy for occupants. That was the genesis of our group. And so my interest is, with potentially the $200,000 grant that you're saying the town could be eligible for if we were to go to green communities. that is something that the town could very well spend, for example, on updating the HVAC system in our school systems. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because I have friends in Sandwich, and I thought that one of the final decisive issues for that town was the people who were undecided about whether this was a good idea or not realized that their grant could help them hugely with a big upgrade to their school system HVAC. Does that ring true to
Yep.
you? So
Yes.
we are
So
in a
I
real
don't,
mess in Barnstable right now relative to mold in the high school and one of our elementary schools, which suggests to me that, and I haven't been, I'm not an insider. I don't know all the details. I know we did $500,000 of mold remediation in those two buildings over the
oh,
summer. And staff and students are so sick in the elementary school that families are pulling their kids out of the school.
oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I did
So
not know that.
that's terrible. But
It
what
is
I'm
terrible.
thinking is, if they're probably trying to do a cleanup, and there's been discussion, I'm just getting this from the newspapers, they're saying, oh, it's so expensive. Well, how expensive is the health of the kids
So,
and the
so I
staff?
guess, Jane, is the question, can the money, say the 220,000, can that be used for mold
Well,
remediation?
maybe not mold remediation, but they've already done that. But then upgrade the HVAC system so that it's more likely to support healthy indoor air going forward with heat recovery, proper ventilation, proper
Okay,
filtering, and that sort of thing. Is
So
that
the
something
good,
that it could be used for?
yeah, so the good news is that code, both base code and stretch code, everything's been updated to require ventilation. Stretch code also requires that heat recovery process that goes in so that so you get the exchanges of fresh air, but it warms the air as it
Right,
comes into the
right,
building, so you're saving energy at the same
right.
time.
Good.
But yes, it's in residential and commercial, ventilation is required. Yes, we do pay for upgraded HVAC systems. What we don't pay for anymore is fossil fuel boilers, or oil. We don't pay for that kind of fossil fuel, oil, or gas equipment. We do pay for heat pumps. We have added ventilation to buildings as part of HVAC projects. They don't even always save energy, to be honest with you, but we understand it's very important for public health. So we do see them being put in conjunction with each other. And people are really excited about the ability to control humidity and to add AC in some of these buildings that are running almost 24/7, honestly, between activities and community meetings. And there's some of them are warming and cooling shelters as well.
Good.
So,
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
so Lisa, this just in terms of things that I've read, I've
mhm.
I it, the written material seems ambiguous as to whether the ventilation requirements of the stretch code are the same as in the base code, or they're more stringent. But you're pretty clear that they're basically the same.
They told me, what I was told is that the base code doesn't require you to do the energy recovery, but they both include um ventilation. But to what degree of ventilation are you saying? I can't speak to that, but you certainly,
Okay.
something like, if you want more information about the ventilation, like the exchanges per square foot or per minute, I would actually go right to the technical assistance guide, that hotline I gave you, and you can email and ask them the
Okay.
difference.
All right.
That's a little over my head, air exchanges.
Yeah.
I'm more of a marketing person as opposed to a code person, and I don't want to give you wrong information. It's easier to give correct information up front rather than try to backpedal.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I guess from the town stand, and the reason I asked is are the ventilate are with the stretch code, are you getting better ventilation requirements compared to the base code? And it's just not clear to me.
Well, but if it's ERVs, those are good ventilation with optimizing your energy efficiency at the same
Right,
time.
right. It's a more energy efficient form of ventilation. But okay, so but the question is whether the ventilation is better.
I think we just look at that more. We'll look at that after this, we'll get
Oh,
back to you with questions. I think going to the technical assistant hotline is good.
Part of the confusion, I think, too, and my hesitance is like some of this applies to existing buildings as well. And when you're retrofitting existing buildings, what you're required to do may not be the same as for new construction. So I would prefer you to ask someone if you're talking about what happens if we want to upgrade an existing school, and we're doing this large scale of a renovation, and it's just, and we want to integrate this. A lot of that, you can have an architect on board or an engineering service to help you with that. And it's going to vary. It's not like starting from the ground up where you model something at the beginning and you start. Some buildings nowadays, they don't even have operable windows. It's just the HVAC systems run and the windows aren't operable so that they stay in balance all the time. What we're talking about is your existing schools and making significant changes to them. And I will tell you, $220,000 will not make a dent. You can phase these projects, but I'm sure that Barnstable High School and the elementary school and the middle school to upgrade all of those HVAC systems is going to be significant.
Well, yeah,
all right, let's Lisa,
we'll go on. We'll look at
why
that
don't we move
separately.
on?
Thank you.
Why don't we move on? We're time limited here.
Yep. I'm done. I can send you this slide deck. This is just, usually people, when we talk about electrification, want to know how that's going to impact the grid. Is the grid ready? And basically we're telling you where electric heat pumps and stuff have a reduction in demand, and it helps the grid. And then the other thing I wanted to, this was just the proposed changes, talking about those proposed changes from that 9/16 meeting. And they're not finalized, so I don't want to really get into that, but we wouldn't have the workshop with your town council until after this until we know exactly what they're going to be and when they're going to be effective, because I think that's very important. And this is my contact information and some other resources, which includes that energy code training. And on that energy code training is also a link to the technical assistant. And I'll send that to you. Okay, Barry? Okay.
Lisa, we appreciate that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rush you at the end there, but does anyone have any additional questions for Lisa?
I guess my final question, Lisa, is last time this went to a hearing or a vote on as to whether we should even consider it, the pushback in my memory was people didn't want the extra hassle, is what it seemed like to me, and they were sure that the cost was going to be, the killer. And so I'm wondering, and are you going to be able to get us some kind of bundled data that you have on not only what amount of grant each green community has gotten in total or an average per year, but what the towns think they may have saved, say on the municipal building operating because of meeting code that was required to be a green community? Is there some kind of cost savings, I guess is my bottom line, data?
So we look at every project that communities want to do, including designation projects. We're a little more lenient with designation projects, but we look at them all in terms of energy savings and emissions reductions. And it's a competitive process. So we are looking at those before we even award a grant. And then we look at communities in terms of their annual reporting, which is required to make sure they're still enforcing the 5 criteria that are required to become green communities. And we're tracking their baseline energy use from when they were designated and what they're doing in the current annual report year. And I can tell you a bunch of communities, for example, this year we'll make an announcement and say so many more communities reached this 20% goal. or 15 or 20% goal, depending, that they're making progress. So communities definitely can see their progress. We don't necessarily go out and tell you what everybody's progress is, but there is a grant summary and map available on our webpage that shows you every grant that every community has received and what they used it for. Like, for example, we'll say to do HVAC in their middle school or lighting. So for sure, these projects are saving money and reducing emissions without a doubt. And they're saving funding as well, because energy is not getting less expensive.
Right. I guess I wonder, is it also represented in the format of per capita savings too? Because if a town is growing and they're also, even the fact that they're growing population or growing in their building, but they're still reducing use, that's even more impressive. So I wonder if it's if the data is represented in that way.
I don't know that we do it per capita, but we definitely track. We don't, we have a place where we can do building stock changes so that communities who have to grow aren't being penalized in terms of their reaching their goal in over 5 years, so that we can make a calculation, like if you had to add on to your police station or your schools, so that we don't say, oh, because if you need a bigger school, it's going to cost you more to run it, most likely.
So,
Okay.
yeah, Lisa, just at a very 10,000-foot level, what you're talking about is data related to public facilities for towns that become green communities.
Yeah.
Some of the other issues raised are, what are the costs for, private builders and homeowners for new construction. And that's where you're updating the costs and benefits from the homeowner's perspective. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay, so there are two different sets of
I
data.
think we'll have that data for you, Barry, by the time we do a workshop in January, because it's certainly been, we've certainly written a check to get a contractor to do this work. So they're working on it.
Right, and the workshop you're referring to would be something that the town is doing as opposed to a DOER workshop. Is that correct?
It would be, so what I'm saying is, if you want to do a workshop with your town council,
right, okay,
and bring on maybe even you could even have a group of panelists. You could have someone from the real estate market. You could have someone from the building market.
Right, okay, I just wanted to make clear
and we
that
could
that's
bring in
something
we'd
that
bring
we
in a
would
code
be-
specialist. Yeah,
that we would be doing, and not not a separate DOER thing. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. This has been very, very helpful and very useful. Really appreciate your spending the time to do this.
No problem. I always recommend too that you speak to your neighbors. Like, if you have communities who are, like I said, most of the communities on the Cape are enforcing the stretch code, and we're not hiding information. It's a good idea to just pick up the phone and talk to those other communities and ask them how it's going. I'm not suggesting that people aren't going to say there's an occasional issue or concern, but for the most part, I think that it's going well. So
Okay.
talk to your neighbors.
Okay, good. That's a good suggestion.
All right.
Well,
Thanks very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So let's move over to Chris, because I know he's got to leave in about 15 minutes. So I want to give him the opportunity to tell us about what he wants to talk about.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah, so my apologies. Jane sent me a message and said, hey, are you at the meeting? I was already at Climate Week, and I meant to write and say I was not going to be around. But it was a good amount of greenwashing at the event, of course, which is kind of to be expected. But common theme is rolling climate change into all levels of government planning and having a path forward. But just wanted to kind of fill everyone in on, since I've been asked many times, and maybe it's for your own benefit, or if people that are down there. Hurricane Milton, down along the Gulf Coast, is sitting over waters right now, if you look at the screen here, that are 800 times more likely because of climate change, which is truly remarkable. And we've already seen this storm jump into the top 10 list of lowest barometric pressure recorded and wind speeds, which are now sustained at 180 miles per hour. Yes, this isn't Cape Cod, but it's a lesson I think that we can all kind of internalize, that these storms that are we always thought were unprecedented are happening more and more frequently. And just because we're long overdue for a hurricane, hurricane intensity will be an issue here in New England, which would be difficult to sustain a Category 3 hurricane, except back in 1938, that was an exception. But now it would be very likely because of the much warmer than average ocean water temperatures. And Barry, to your point of the water temps off the buoy, you sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole. I'm still compiling, so I'm hoping to have that for next meeting. But the list and the climatology for that data is extensive. So I'm still working on that. Yeah, obviously the warming trends, not necessarily in the front end of the season, but lasting much later into the season, we're seeing incredible warmth in this part of the country when it comes to the ocean water temperatures as well. That's really all that I have. I mean, if anyone, I know this is the public meeting, but if anyone has questions or interest in Florida, I'm happy to answer questions about that too.
It looks like a pretty big killer storm heading for the Tampa to Fort Myer area, right? For landfall Wednesday morning, or is that sooner now that it's going faster, or?
No, slowing down actually a bit. And it appears, so when we look at storm surge, and I think this is a benefit for everyone that's on the Cape, it's kind of the most difficult thing to forecast and project, because if you play cards, it's kind of like getting the royal flush in poker. It's difficult. You need everything to line up. In fact, our research at Woods Hole Group has found through modeling that the worst surge comes in not at high tide, but in an incoming tide, because you have the momentum of the water already coming in, add on top of it the force, the fetch of the wind blowing in off the water, and that exacerbates things. So in this case, you want to be east or south of the eye, and they're going to be in the sweet spot right now if the track verifies. Unfortunately for Sarasota, St. Petersburg, and into Tampa as well. It'll kind of funnel all that water up into the bay out of the Gulf of Mexico. What we have working in our favor is if you look at the bathymetry, it's more of a steep slope off our coastline, except in Cape Cod Bay. And we are seeing some extensive erosion up in the inside of the bay, like in Sandwich, for example. But if you have that gradual slope up that builds surge even more so, it kind of blows up the scale of it. And in the Gulf Coast, it's like that along the entire Gulf. It's very shallow and it stays shallow, and that kind of builds the water as it comes in with a storm. So for many reasons, unfortunately, this is going to be a pretty much a worst case scenario, even if it's a weakening hurricane at landfall.
Boy, pretty frightening. We have family down there.
I had a question for Chris. So
yeah,
thank you, Chris. You said that because of climate change, the water in the Gulf is so warm that it's 800 times more likely to have a large hurricane.
Yeah.
Can you say that in words so I can?
Yeah. So the rapid attribution studies that can happen within 48 hours of an event, we can do with precipitation. So, for example, with Helene up into the Carolinas, it produced 50% more moisture than without the impacts of climate change, without the atmospheric warming. So they model all of these solutions and they add in the warming, and we're able to see. So when you look at the water temperatures, the warmth of those water temperatures in the Gulf are up to 800 times more likely because of climate change. And it isn't just the surface warmth. We're talking about total heat content, which is important here too, which is not just warm water at the surface. Typically, hurricanes turn the ocean into a washing machine and the cold air upwells to the surface. But we're having this heat content go all the way down almost the ocean floor, which is concerning. And that kind of adds into the issue as well. It isn't just the surface warmth, it is the warmth all the way down.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Go ahead, Rob. Rob, you're on mute.
Yeah. So how much does cloud cover affect water temperature? Is that another rabbit hole?
No, it doesn't. Less of an impact than it does on land, right? Because it takes so long to warm up the water and it takes so long for it to cool off. You would really need an extended period of time of cloud cover. But you bring up an interesting point, and I hate saying it, especially on something that's that's being recorded, but there's rumors that weather modification is a thing. Obviously, that's hogwash. We can't control a hurricane and steer it into Florida. But solar geoengineering is a thing, using the same idea that you can put up aerosols into the atmosphere and drop the temperature down considerably, both in the oceans and in the atmosphere. And that's one way to combat global warming. Obviously, you still need drastic emissions cuts, and obviously that technology in bad hands is not a good thing. But that is one thing that Harvard is one of the leading experts, their program there at this solar geoengineering. But we've reached that critical point where we haven't done enough climate action that they are considering this.
Yeah, so this is what you're talking about, is putting aerosols into the air to essentially
reflects the sun's energy.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right. Anyone else have any questions for Chris? Or okay, so if not, Gordon, do you? No. If not, let's sort of go back to green communities for a second. So, and I think I raised this at the last meeting, but I did draft some comments with regard to these proposed regulations for the stretch code, and I met with Brian Florence and Mark Ells, and Brian Florence had some suggested changes, and with some of those changes and some edits that I had, those comments were submitted by Mark Ells on behalf of the town of Barnstable, that generally were supportive of the proposed changes to make the stretch code more lenient and more flexible with regard to home remodels. But with regard to what Lisa raised, is basically to update the sort of the cost benefit analysis from the standpoint of homeowners and builders, and also see if they could provide some examples for home models that would be subject to the stretch code. So I just wanted to say that, and that was a cooperative effort.
I appreciate you doing that, Barry, and I think this is a very I would say tedious but detailed process. You're doing a great job with it. What I'm concerned about, and I may be wrong, but I don't think there's any cost benefit estimate put on improved health of building occupants by green building in general, and probably then, to include this stretch code. And that's enormous. That is enormous.
It may be, but it may be pretty straightforward in the sense that so the stretch code provides really an incentive to go all electric, to use heat pumps basically, and if you do that, you're not going to have fossil fuel generation inside the house. So that by itself, I would think would have a significant health benefit.
Well, it does, it does. And it also, and I've not been very good at drilling down into details, but the fact that energy recovery ventilation or heat recovery ventilation is required is terrific news for indoor air quality. Because the early days of building tight energy efficiency buildings, if you want to look at a test case state that was all excited about saving energy and making it less expensive to heat homes in the winter, look at the state of Maine. They did not require standards for indoor air quality. They didn't require ventilation. They had a huge uptick in the 1990s in respiratory problems, cancers, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Because of tight buildings. So this is
I
a
understand.
great.
So I understand. So the time period they basically, one thing may not have been clear from Lisa's presentation. Not only is the stretch code updated every 3 years, so is the base code, and so
Right.
they took the experience of the pandemic, where there was a lot of concern about indoor air quality and potential effects, and that's why they focused on these ventilation requirements.
Okay, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else on?
Sorry, Barry, real quick. I think John was just asking a question, but he was.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'll go back to it. I'm just trying to understand if as I understand it, the stretch code requires the energy recovery ventilation, but does it also require more? Does that also lead to more ventilation? I'm just wondering, do you get more ventilation with the stretch code than with the base code?
Yeah, and that was the question that I had as well, John. And I guess we don't know the answer yet,
Yeah.
but we should look into that.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else on green communities? If not, John, do you want to go talk about food waste?
Sure, and I just take up a couple of minutes here. So we're continuing on the two tracks we've been following. The two biggest opportunities for collecting food waste are the large commercial generators, and also the people who are already voluntarily recycling at the transfer station. So on the large generators, we're trying to set up a meeting with Tom McKean, the director of the health department. He did respond to us last week, is willing to meet with us. Haven't gotten a date from him yet. So Barry, do you think maybe tomorrow would be an appropriate time to send a follow-up, or you think I should wait a little bit longer?
Yeah, when did you send
I think it was probably Tuesday, maybe Tuesday, possibly
I
Wednesday
think
last
maybe
week.
so, because he said he suggested later this week.
Yeah.
And I think I've already, as time passes, at least for me, my calendar filled up. So,
Are you? I think we were talking about Thursday of this week. Is that no longer a good day for you?
No, Thursday's still good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe since I guess tomorrow being Tuesday, I guess it would be appropriate to
I just
follow up. And again, I don't. This is maybe a detail we could take up separately, but I'm wondering if really the holdup is Brian's schedule. Would it be inappropriate to suggest that we could possibly go forward without him, or I don't know. I guess I would like to have Brian there.
Yeah, maybe if he gets back, it's obvious, from our perspective, I don't know whether we.
Yeah, I think probably better just leave it alone. I'll just ask if Thursday is still a possibility. Right. One other thought about that, if I'm remembering correctly, Tom McKean is also responsible for oversight of the trash haulers in town. Am I remembering that correctly?
I think that's correct as well, but
yeah. So he really could be,
to be sure. I thought that. Yeah.
So he could be really a key player on this.
Right.
So that's where we are on that angle of things. And the other one, of course, is the transfer station. And Chris and I had exchanged some emails this week and about what we can do out there. Tracy, who runs the transfer station, has raised the concern that they're seeing contamination in what people are dropping off. And he wants to first address that issue. So that's something we're going to have to deal with.
Do you know what sort of contamination?
Plastic bags, he said specifically.
Okay.
Yeah,
So there's some plastic bags that are compostable.
Just on that, anything, it's not just plastic bags, that's just kind of like the general thing.
Yeah.
But really anything that can't be composted with the food waste, it's considered a contaminant.
Right. And did Tracy say anything about whether any loads were actually being rejected by the company that's picking them up?
What he said right now is that the company that's picking them up has been very lenient with us in regards to composting. They're also very lenient about the pickup schedule. So if we do end up really expanding this process, they have no issue coming and picking it up. However, with that, you get the trade-off of they're going to be less lenient with the contaminants.
Yeah. So that's something we'll have to address. I wonder if there is confusion over what types of bags are appropriate. Maybe people are using some type of supposedly biodegradable bag that isn't actually compostable, or it's hard to imagine. Well, I guess it's not hard to imagine, but it would be disappointing if people are, just think they could take a regular plastic bag and throw it in there.
Yeah, I
wonder.
don't know. Chris, I wonder whether you can just put a sign by the whatever.
So as I understand it, there is a sign there. I haven't actually gone down there, and John and I might go down there at some point. I'm definitely going to go down there. But as far as I know, there is a sign there that says, this is what's allowed to be recycled. This isn't what's allowed to be recycled. Whether that sign needs to be updated, clarified, moved, what have you, I don't know.
Yeah. When I was there last week, I saw that they had added a second small sign that just says no plastic bags.
Okay.
But I think one of the things we might want to do is right now there's the sign lists a whole lot of things that can't go in there, walnut shells and something, so maybe what we would want to do is have a sign that really makes clear what are really that emphasizes the problem items, so that people see that.
I think Rob had a comment. Did you have something to add, Rob?
I was just gonna say, yeah, there's a plastic bag sign now, and the do's and don'ts sign is tedious.
Yeah. And another question on the question of bags is, my understanding is that brown paper grocery bags are okay. And maybe we should encourage people to use those. But before doing that, I guess I'd want to double check with the hauler to make sure that they're okay with that.
Black Earth has specifically said they love brown paper bags. If it's Black Earth, I don't know.
If this is Watts Family Farm.
Yeah, but
I'm pretty confident.
I would work under the assumption that they are, but I'll definitely double check that.
Before we put up a sign.
Oh, absolutely.
Brown paper bags at home, and they compost.
And while you're at it, just to double check the white or green bags that say they're compostable, I assume that they're okay. That's what we use.
That's what I wanted to clarify, because there is a type of bag that is compostable that I understand is okay, but there may be some ambiguity there, and part of the problem is biodegradable and compostable are different things, and it may be that somebody has gotten some supposedly biodegradable bags that are not appropriate for compost. So maybe, and if that's a problem, maybe that's something we would want to emphasize in the signage.
Okay. Yeah. So Chris, if you get clarification on that, and Todd, we can report it back at the next meeting. That'd be great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so that's kind of where we are with the food. So I just think to discuss the science, just be helpful to to know what we're talking about. So we'll do that.
Okay. Well, good. Anything else, food waste?
No, that's all I've got.
I was just going to
Okay.
throw in there, in my conversations with Tracy, he just said that they have been seeing a steady uptick in people who are utilizing the food waste shed. So just good news on that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's great. It would be wonderful to get to actually get the actual numbers on it, because I know he keeps count because he pays for each one.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I thought was helpful, there's a sign as you're coming to the end there. And when I was there, within the last few weeks, there was a sign indicating that there's food waste composting. And that was the first time I had seen that. So I think that was a plus.
Just out of curiosity, was that like a normal metal sign or was it one of those like highway signs?
It was like a highway sign. So
Okay.
it's flashing and it's on and off. They have different notifications for people, but they.
Okay. Tracy had mentioned that to me, and I just wanted to make sure in my head it was the right sign.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So just moving on then, the agenda. Any new business? I don't have any new business or any additional updates. Does anyone? Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I got to thinking, I was thinking that someday I want to get an electric vehicle. That means I'm going to have to get a charger for it. And I was wondering, I thought, well, if I put the charger out kind of near the driveway and allow, actually charge other people to use it on the street, what kind of problems are the town going to throw up?
So what you're saying is you've got a charger that you own, is that right? Okay, and you wanted to say a neighbor wants to charge his car using your charger, and whether there are any issues with your charging your neighbor for the use of it. Is that the question?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. Well, I mean, I guess there is a question if you're doing it as a business and is it subject to regulation?
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah. So I don't know who the person to.
I would go to our green community, our what do we call him? The energy coordinator.
Sean, who works with David Anthony. He was he was really working on the EV chargers as far as the town goes. So I bet he's the one that would have that answer. And I think this whole sector is evolving, Rob, and that is something I think to think about, whether it's you as a private owner or if it's a nonprofit that wants to have a way to make money. That has to be an opportunity for the future.
Yeah, if there's
let me ask you, Rob. You're doing this as the intent of doing it as a business, or just to defray the costs of your having bought and using a charger yourself?
Oh, I mean, technically it would be a business because I'm charging people for electricity. And I guess the rental space is one spot in the driveway, but yeah, I was thinking that the chargers were really wicked expensive, but they're not. But electric cars are.
Well, the biggest is you have to have it wired for it. But because I've done that myself, and I assume you're talking about a level 2 charger, or as opposed to a level 1
probably.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, if it's going to be kind of a businessy type thing, then more of a level 3 would be better, because somebody might not want to leave their, I mean, they probably will leave their car overnight, but you know, if they want to use a couple hours in the day, you know, level 3 would be better, more better.
Right,
And I
that's
think
good.
those get a little more pricey, but those get kind of
Exactly.
garish in a residential neighborhood.
So how do we want to leave this? Do you want to follow up with Sean, or do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to ask if that's something I should, well, I was, you know, who I should call.
I think it's a good question, Rob. I think that we need to move forward on having more availability of chargers if we're going to move into an era where more people own these things. And I think it's good to bring up the question and bring, you know, put that option out there. And you know, probably it may be that people haven't thought it through yet, but it's good to have that on the table. That's the limiting factor, in my opinion, is we love our EV, but the limiting factor for other people getting one is availability of charging and range. Those are the two factors that are worrying people. So I think it's a very relevant question, a good question.
So maybe Rob, if you want to pursue that and then kind of report back for the next meeting, and then
Yeah,
take it up
I'll
from
do
there.
that.
Okay, great, thank you. It just reminded me that there was one thing that additional thing to report on. So I was contacted by a company that I think it's Solar Simplified. Let me see. Yeah, Solar Simplified, that basically is trying to develop community solar, which is a program that pursuant to state regulations that will provide a guaranteed discount to customers. It varies based on 10% for all customers and 20% if you get some form of public assistance based on income. And so they have a business and reached out, I think, initially to Gordon and me, and they gave a short presentation, and you know, basically they're looking at getting customers in the town, not necessarily the town itself. But is this something that you would be interested in? I could ask them to give a presentation for our committee, which they were interested in doing. The one difference from I've heard from other community solar providers, their solar generation is kind of at a commercial scale, and megawatt, several megawatts, whereas these folks, what they have so far is rooftop solar, and they built enough for about 300 residential customers.
Where are their panels?
They're in Maynard, Massachusetts.
They're where?
Maynard, Massachusetts.
Oh,
which is near Sudbury. It's
well, I'm a little bit maxed out on some of these off-Cape solar companies. I'm very happy with getting the power that we do buy from Eversource, but sourced through Cape Light Compact to be 100% renewable. And I'm leery of off-Cape companies that, basically it's a power purchase agreement. Essentially, they want you to buy in for a certain amount of time, and your power will be discounted. Is that?
Yeah. So basically,
how are they going to win? How are they going to earn money?
So basically, your bill from Eversource is reduced or eliminated. You pay the solar provider at a discount, either 10 or 20%, and effectively the difference I think is reimbursed to Eversource from customers. I'm not totally clear on that, but
You know what I would do? I would ask Cape Light Compact first. What do you think? Are these guys a legitimate competitor, or are these guys, I don't know. We had the whole town of Yarmouth high and dry with about 50 customers, hung out to dry with a illegitimate off Cape solar group, Solar Wolf, I think
yeah,
was their name.
yeah, I think the design of this is less subject to abuse.
I
But
would ask somebody like Cape Light Compact that I trust.
Okay.
And I don't really want to hear. I think we have I guess what I'm saying is I think we have a lot of good options, and
Okay. Well, I'll just pursue, and yeah, and this is not a high priority from my standpoint either, but I'll put in a call to someone at Cape Light Compact and see what they say. But it's a form of business that I've seen done elsewhere, so it's not.
well, the one that I've seen that was great, but it's not the same, because this is a commercial location away, remote from the customers. But before we left DC in like 2016 and 17, DC was like the hottest place for groups of venture capitalists to come to pay for rooftop solar for nonprofits, like basically churches and schools were their primary target. They were coming to DC because we had the best SREC, and they could get the tax incentives that the nonprofits couldn't. But the good thing about what they did, they would offer a power purchase agreement of a similar amount, immediately discount your power 10 or 20%, somewhere in that range. But then they would depreciate the system, and after 6 years, they would deed it over to the nonprofit. So not only did you host a system, you got a discounted energy bill immediately, but then in 6 years, you owned your system. And so that actually was a good enough deal that it attracted these investors, but it was also a good enough deal at the end that the nonprofits owned their system. So that's the arrangement that I think is good, but I'm leery about and maybe unfairly so, but I don't have the capacity to process that.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's
green communities. That's it.
Yeah, sufficiently high priority for this committee, kind of my sense. But I'll follow up with, if I can find out in terms of the bona fides of this or this concept, and I'll just report back at the next meeting.
Thanks. That sounds good.
All right, so that's I think the agenda for the next meeting is kind of the same as what we've had before, unless anyone has some specific additions. I think we'll put on the agenda that Rob reporting back on how to describe it, like charging EVs as a business opportunity. Is that a good way of describing it?
Defraying costs.
Yeah, defraying costs.
Okay.
Removing barriers to purchase.
That's a good one. That's a good way to phrase it. Increasing access to EV charging in the neighborhood. Something like that.
Okay, that's I think, why don't we use Jane's suggestion? That's probably as good as we're going to get with this limited time. So any other suggestions? With that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I have one question. Did I miss at the beginning? Did we hear whether Kelly had her baby, Chris?
Oh gosh.
Yes, she had it I think like a week and a half ago. Yeah.
Only a couple days after her due date then.
Yeah, it was like a day or two after her due date.
Good.
Yeah, and a boy or a girl?
Boy.
Everybody doing fine? She's doing fine?
As far as I know, mom's healthy, baby's healthy.
That's great.
All good.
That's
Kelly,
great news.
Kelly has already been emailing us, and it's like, Kelly, take a nap.
Yeah, that's right. Tell her to go home, stay home, don't get on her computer.
Exactly.
Great, thank
No,
you.
she's doing great.
Great.
That's wonderful. All right, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next meeting in a couple weeks.